Welcome to this fourth edition of the new Trent England Show video edition, which I announced this at the end of the radio program this morning. We've been on the radio for 3 years with AM 1640 KZLS across north central Oklahoma City, up actually into Kansas, and very glad to have been with everyone that way. But this video program will become just the Trent England Show as of next week. Next week we will no longer be on KZLS radio. We will be right here at 9 a.m. every weekday morning, except when I'm out of town, which happens from time to time. But pretty much every weekday morning, I will be right here and with you for a half an hour at the beginning of every day, talking about the news that we need to know nationally and the things here at the state level in Oklahoma. And we talk about some things that happen in other states as well, the things where we can really make a difference. And that is, there's no point in just going out and bloviating. I mean, look, I like to talk. Obviously, that's true. But at the end of the day, who cares, right? Unless there's something we can actually do about it. And so we are constantly driving toward the stories that matter. We cover stories from all around the world when they help us put our own situation in the United States and in the great state of Oklahoma or wherever you are. When they help us put that in context, usually they help us be very thankful for what we have here in the United States. They give us tools to share with younger people around us to help them understand that, look, freedom, liberty is a valuable and a delicate thing. And it is worth trying to understand. It's worth fighting for. And public policy matters, for that matter. And we're going to start off this morning with a story about, federal tax reform is working better, I think, than most of the proponents even dared hope, right? I think that federal tax reform, when you look at stories like the one that broke yesterday about Apple, this is huge news, right? And frankly, if Donald Trump and Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell were not the people most responsible for that, there are a lot of other, there's a lot of other people who had a hand in this within Congress and within the administration and outside of government. There have been a lot of conservative policy wonks working toward this for years and even decades, but right, if it wasn't President Donald Trump, and Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, and House Speaker Paul Ryan, there would be so much more fanfare over stories like the story about Apple the other day. Southwest Airlines, Delta Airlines, all of these banks actually making more money than they even anticipated, and looking ahead and seeing a very bright future. The stock market, they've now coined a new term, melt up, right? It's not a meltdown, it's a melt up, because the stock market is performing so much better than anybody thought it would. But this story about Apple is amazing and important. They are going to voluntarily pay about $38 billion in taxes. Now, it's not, of course, it's not voluntary in the sense that they're not choosing to write the check. They're choosing to do something that will require them to write a check, but that they didn't have to do, right? Which is bring profits home to the United States, back to the United States, and don't just, look, the point of cutting taxes is not to grow government. Conservatives forget this all the time because they think, the Laffer Curve. The Laffer Curve means that, if we cut taxes, then we can bring more revenue in for government. And they forget, look, the point of cutting taxes is not to grow government. The point of cutting taxes is to constrain government and to allow people to keep more of their own money, right? The point of cutting taxes is that it is morally wrong for government to take any money it doesn't need. And if we cut taxes and revenue goes up, we should consider cutting taxes again. But look, it does prove right. A lot of conservatives who do make the point. The Laffer Curve is legitimate to the extent that it does make the point that beyond a certain point, taxes become so burdensome that they're self-defeating, right? Certain tax policies are self-defeating. You can actually cut taxes and you can bring in more money, and that is probably what the corporate tax changes in the federal tax reform are going to do. It looks like you actually will see more money come in. We'll see. We'll see what happens over the course of this year, but Apple is going to pay $38 billion extra dollars, but who cares? That's all money going to the federal government. The bigger story getting less news, less attention, is the other part of that money, right? They're not just bringing back $38 billion so they can hand it over to Uncle Sam. They're bringing back some portion of, or maybe all of, something like, I think it's like $250 billion. They're going to invest that. They're going to invest that money in the United States. They're going to invest $30 billion in capital projects over the next 5 years. That's the plan at Apple. I mean, look, those aren't jobs just in Silicon Valley. Those are jobs building data centers, jobs for construction workers and people who drive tractors and people who drive dump trucks all around the country over the next 5 years to the tune of, well, total $30 billion made possible by tax reform. I mean, that is the spillover effect. That is the economic effect that is just starting to ripple through the U.S. economy. And it's a beautiful thing. And it is, I said this the other day, it is beginning to lay the groundwork for a fascinating 2018 election where people are going to decide whether they vote for the policies that seem to be putting a lot more in their 401ks, even more in their paychecks, or whether they vote for the people who, I don't know, who offer good intentions and who try to convince people to disbelieve their eyes, right? To not believe what they're actually seeing when they get a paycheck, a pay stub, or a statement from their 401k. We'll see what happens. I'm going to be interested to see and to report to you on how the campaigns shape up this year, especially at the federal level, where this is going to be the biggest issue. But while all that's happening, while we have federal tax reform actually working really well at the federal level, here in the great state of Oklahoma, people are pushing tax increases. I kind of feel like I should just leave it at that. I mean, what more do you have to say, right? The Oklahoma Education Association's own poll showed that you know who's way more popular than the Oklahoma legislature, way more popular than the governor of Oklahoma, President Donald Trump, who just signed a big tax cut, right? And yet you've got people out there who actually will say with a straight face, what Oklahomans really want are higher taxes. What Oklahomans really want is bigger government, more government spending. And they don't want more government spending by redirecting it away from low priority items to high priority things like teacher pay. They want more government spending by tax increases. It has to be tax increases. It can't be cost avoidance. It's so great to be on video. I'm on radio and I do the air quotes. Nobody sees them. But, it can't be cost avoidance, right? We were told last year that when the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs said, hey, here's a laundry list, a menu of options, ways to cut government, ways to, here's a whole bunch of low priority programs or ways to run high priority programs better and save money. We were told that's just cost avoidance. That's just cost avoidance. That doesn't bring in new revenue. To which my answer was, my answer was, duh. Of course it's cost of, that's what conservatives and all other responsible people do. When you need more money in a program, you look around and see if you're wasting money in the program before you go and you tell somebody else they have to turn over more money to you, right? That's not even conservative. It's just responsible. So we've got folks out there advocating a big tax increase. They released the income tax details yesterday. I just want to call a couple things to your attention because I thought this was fascinating. First of all, and do we have it up on the screen for people to see? Okay. So first of all, up at the top, it is labeled. I pointed this out on the radio. This is so silly. So I won't spend a bunch of time on it, but it's labeled a simplification of Oklahoma state income taxes. It adds all kinds of rigmarole to itemized deductions. You still have itemized deductions, but some of them are capped, but not all of them are capped. Health deductions for health expenses are capped, but charitable contributions are not capped, right? So it makes that more complicated. Then it adds 2 new income tax brackets. I mean, that's a dramatically more complication in state income taxes. Then it has this little credit thing, more complicated. And then it reduces the standard deduction amounts and disallows the personal exemption, gives us no details about what the amounts there actually are. But look, there's not a single thing in this plan that is simplifying anything, which does, I mean, it's kind of beside the point, except they're trying to sell it as simplification. I don't know who came up with this, right? I mean, it's not serious. I guess that's my only point. It's not serious, right? This was sent out to journalists yesterday. We're letting you in on our plan and how we're going to market our plan, and they're going to market it as simplification. I mean, come on, right? This is not. These people aren't Obi-Wan. The whole, this is tax simplification. It's just not going to work on us, right? So anyhow, it's just silly. It's not really that important, but it goes to questions of seriousness, I guess. Last section here in the summary. If we go down to the bottom, we see this is an income tax increase. Lest anyone be confused, this is a big income tax increase of $175.7 million revenue, right? So it's a revenue bill. When this gets written into a piece of legislation, it will be a revenue bill, which requires a vote of the people unless the legislature happens to pass it with supermajorities, right? That's how that works. And don't let anybody tell you, by the way, we point this out on the radio show all the time, don't let anybody tell you that the Oklahoma Constitution requires 3/4 supermajorities to pass a tax increase. The Oklahoma Constitution requires a simple majority in the House. Revenue bills have to start in the House. So you have to get a simple majority in the House, a simple majority in the Senate, and then a simple majority of the people. That's what the Constitution says. And then it gives a sort of an exception to that. Well, you don't have to go to a vote of the people if the bill happens to pass with 3/4 supermajorities in the House and then in the Senate. That's an exception. That is not the rule. That's the exception. The rule is 3 simple majorities for a tax increase. But for some reason, nobody wants to acknowledge. I mean, I feel like I'm a voice crying in the wilderness, the only person who actually reads the Oklahoma State Constitution and honestly tells people what it says. Finally, the very last bullet point, well, it's the last 2 bullet points. It's supposed to be 1, but somebody's learning how to use Microsoft Word. The last bullet point here, 32.3% of highest income filers represent over 75% of the increase, of the tax increase. So this is the Bernie Bro sales pitch, right? This is the Bernie Bro sales pitch for this sales tax, or excuse me, income tax increase. We're only socking it to the highest income Oklahomans. Who are the highest income Oklahomans? Well, they tell us in parentheses. I'm really surprised that they put this in here. But thankful that they put it in here because they didn't give us enough information to actually do this analysis on our own because they're not telling us all the details. But they point out who are the 32.3% highest income filers in Oklahoma. They're households, families, Oklahoma families with an adjusted gross income of $70,000 or more. That's a firefighter married to a teacher. Right? That is not. This is not a. I mean, this is always the problem for the Bernie Bros, right? You can only soak the rich so much in the United States of America, and then people start getting uncomfortable, right? I mean, over the whole class warfare element here. So you can do the class warfare thing, but you see this every Bernie Bro type tax proposal just about winds up when you actually say, well, who is rich? Who is rich? Well, it's people who make $70,000 or more. I mean, look, that's a good income. I'm not scoffing at it's a good income. But it's not exactly, that's not exactly Rolls-Royce money. Right? These, as I said on the radio, these are not people driving BMWs necessarily. These are people driving Hondas, right? So if you read all the way to the end of their document here, you find that out. Okay, that is the breaking news out there this morning. I don't know if I've seen that. As I said, this was sent out to journalists the other day. I'm not even sure if really those details made the paper today. What is in the paper today, by the way, is the Oklahoma Education Association came out yesterday and endorsed this big tax hike plan. And helpfully, I'm so thankful to them because they proved a point that I've said over and over again about trying to appease the left. You can't appease the left. You can't appease the ideological left. And the Oklahoma Education Association is Oklahoma's largest teachers union. It is not, most teachers have nothing to do with the OEA, by the way. Most teachers, even teachers in unionized districts unionized by the OEA, The data that we have, it's sort of incomplete, but suggests that most teachers, even in those districts, choose to have as little to do with the OEA as possible. I think we have a news story about that up at the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs website, ocpathink.org. But the OEA is it's an affiliate of the National Education Association, the NEA, which is a very, very left-wing special interest group in Washington, D.C. And the OEA is out there saying, much to their credit, right? This honesty is very helpful. This massive tax increase package would be a good start, a good down payment on growing government, right? And this is such a reminder. I think a lot of the people involved in this push for this big tax increase plan, I think a lot of them think, well, if we just get this, everybody will be happy. Right? We'll just, the debates will end, the rancor will end, and everyone will, everyone wins something and loses something, and it's a classic compromise, and everyone's just, we'll be able to sit down and sing Kumbaya, and that's not what's going to happen. If it's not gonna pass, but if these big tax increases passed, the next day or the next week or the next month, But in much less time than the next year, you would have all the same voices on the left out there saying, and even more energized than before, because they would have won this incremental victory, and they would be out there saying, we must increase teacher pay more, and that means that we need a massive tax increase that's going to pay for actually a whole bunch of other things, but we only want to talk about teachers because everybody likes teachers, and if you're against us, it's because you don't like teachers, right? The rhetoric won't even change. The template won't even change. The numbers will change a little bit, and all the rhetoric will remain the same, and all the rancor will remain the same. Right? And I think that's what people miss, but maybe they'll read the story about the OEA and maybe they'll start to get it. I don't know. I'm not gonna hold my breath. The other person who endorsed this plan yesterday, and I was kind of surprised, is OU President David Boren. David Boren pushed that big tax increase, the sales tax increase, back a couple of years ago. Looked like it was going to pass. It was polling really, really well. Right? And then the only poll that matters is the poll on Election Day, and voters crushed it, destroyed it. But I was kind of surprised because, David Boren, that tax increase was not as big. It was a couple $100,000 less than this tax increase. So maybe David Boren's not as conservative a Democrat as we're always told he is. I don't know. I mean, he's endorsing an even bigger tax increase than the one he originally asked for. So cost avoidance. Let's not leave it there, right? Let's go to some better solutions, a better way for Oklahoma, a better way for any state than raising taxes is to ask yourself the question: how do we spend the money we have right now? And just yesterday at ocpathink.org, we put up a list. We got this information from a public document request of the Oklahoma Film and Music Office. A request to know what are all the movies that were paid for through this Hollywood handout. They call it the Oklahoma Film Enhancement Rebate Program, or OFERP. Now, they don't call it that. We call it the Hollywood handout. And you can see the list. I'm not going to go through it. I just encourage you to go and look at this list and see how many of these movies you have never heard of, because they've never been seen on a single movie screen anywhere in the country ever. Right? So many of these movies are basically hobby films, right? And the one that you're probably most likely to have heard of, August Osage County, is a movie produced by Harvey Weinstein, right? I mean, we subsidized a bunch of Hollywood multimillionaires, including Harvey Weinstein, with over $4 million of Oklahomans' hard-earned money to make some Hollywood millionaires richer, right? Or, at best, to pay them to come and hang out in our state for a few weeks. Right? And on the other side of this, you have all these movies they're not really movies, right? These are your tax dollars. If you're in Oklahoma, these are your tax dollars, right? This is not just waste. This is immoral, right? This is taking money away from hard-working Oklahoma families and giving it to people who the politicians think are cooler than you, because they're in the movie business. Even if they just do it as a hobby, right? Even if they just do it on the weekends, they're filmmakers. They're cooler than you are, right? And so government puts a gun to your head and says, you give us some of your money, And we're not going to go spend it on roads. We're not going to go spend it on teachers or textbooks or police officers. We're going to give it to Harvey Weinstein because we think he's cool. There's so much I could say about why some of our politicians would have things in common with Harvey Weinstein, but I'm not going to say any of that. You go look at the list. Look at the list of these movies. Some of them are bizarre. If you start Googling them, be careful. Bizarro stuff out there. But your tax dollars help to pay for it. And in the case of some of these films, must have. I don't know. I still have other questions about these programs that I think at some point we'll get answers to. I don't understand how people could spend quite so much money on some of these films, and I wonder. And that's where I'll leave it because I'm not going to slander anybody. I'm going to get the facts and share them with you. What else? How else could we save, and this is big bucks, how could we save big bucks in the state of Oklahoma simply by doing things that other states are already doing? Learning through the system of federalism where different states have different public policies. It's been stifled by federal government overreach, but there's still some of it, and we can still learn from it. And, the big ticket item that is eating state budgets alive is Medicaid. And Medicaid spending in Oklahoma has increased dramatically. It is over a $5 billion program, roughly $3 billion from the federal government and $2 billion in state money here in Oklahoma. This is a tremendous increase. I think it was, if you go back about 15 years, we were spending about 750 million, give or take, on Medicaid, right? This program has been growing faster than the rest of the budget, faster than tax revenues, faster than the economy, faster than everything, right? The Medicaid budget in Oklahoma, we didn't expand Medicaid, right? We didn't expand Medicaid, and it still grew here, and it's still growing faster than we can keep up with. What are other states doing? Well, one thing other states are doing is just looking at how their program works and trying to make it more honest. Oregon did this study covered by U.S. News and World Report in the fall, but I pulled this up for us here this morning. Oregon has actually a great Secretary of State, surprisingly enough, and Secretary of State Dennis Richardson in Oregon audited their Medicaid program and found 115,000 people who had not been evaluated for eligibility within the program within the 1 year. They're supposed to evaluate people every year. And at least 50,000 of those people, or about 50,000 of those people, were found to be actually ineligible for Medicaid benefits in Oregon. Now, that means that instead of spending money on the poorest of the poor, Oregon had other people who were taking some of those, taking some of those resources, right? And so that driving part of the increase in costs in that state, and they're trying to get a handle on that. In Arkansas, even more recently, they've been auditing their Medicaid rolls from within the program. Dennis Richardson is, he's the one conservative elected statewide in Oregon, so he's not within the Medicaid bureaucracy there. He's in the Secretary of State's office trying to do what he can. Arkansas has they've done some audits within their Medicaid program and found about the same thing. And through a combination of some audits and some changes in policy their Medicaid enrollment has gone down 117,000 people. A lot of that, they're saying somewhere around 70 or 80,000 people just were not eligible. And then some other people got off the program through various policy changes. Again, focusing Medicaid on what it was originally supposed to be about, which is helping the poorest of the poor who couldn't work. People who couldn't work. So people who were elderly or children or disabled and also very poor. That's what Medicaid was designed to be for. And you have states like Arkansas trying to get back to that. Here in the great state of Oklahoma, we saw this fight play out in the legislature. Very disappointing that the legislature at the end of the day refused to go forward with Medicaid audits, which would save Oklahoma federal dollars, right? I said $3 billion in federal funds, $2 billion in state funds, so that makes the math pretty easy. Oklahoma legislators refused to move forward with Medicaid audits because a handful of legislators said that it was mean, that it meant we didn't like poor people if we tried to keep people who don't qualify from defrauding the Medicaid system, right? And legislators actually got away with that. I actually watched the feed of the debate on the House of Representatives floor, the Oklahoma House of Representatives floor. It was startling, right? Is it mean to poor people to try to make sure that a program that's for poor people doesn't have other people defrauding the program? How can that be? Right? But that's where we are in Oklahoma. Hopefully the legislature will get it together this year and actually pass Medicaid audits. Representative Elise Hall is the legislator who has been championing those Medicaid audits, trying to make the system more honest and more respectful, both of the recipients who really need it and of the taxpayers who pay for it. And so, our encouragement to Representative Hall, hopefully she'll keep pushing that and working on that, and the legislature will get serious and do it. It's common sense policy. It's working in other states. Okay, finally, last story here on the Trent England Show. We have to stand up for some of our friends out there in the world of education who are being attacked in a really, really dishonest, really unfair way by one writer over at Oklahoma Watch. And look, when Oklahoma Watch tells, when they tell a good story in a fair way, we love it. They do a great job with a lot of their stories. They have a lot of great reporters there. But unfortunately, their education reporter is just systematically dishonest. And the latest installment of this came out yesterday. The headline is, "Scholarship Schools Exclude Disabled Students from Discrimination Protections." Now, look, here's the bottom line on this, right? When people go out and create private schools, they typically have a vision. They have something they want to specialize in. And this is why, for some students and for some teachers, private schools offer something that's so important because they offer a customization, a vision, a particular mission within education. And no doubt the best example of this in Oklahoma City and in the state of Oklahoma is Positive Tomorrows. We have a school in Oklahoma City specifically for kids whose families are homeless. I have broadcast the radio program live from Positive Tomorrows before, and I had a wonderful time. The teachers there are wonderful. The students are wonderful. The place just feels happy and warm, and there's a lot of learning afoot. And it's a private school, and it is a school where if you're not from a homeless family, they're not going to let you in because they have a particular mission. They have something they do, right? There are other schools in Oklahoma that are specifically for kids who have a parent in prison, for high school age kids who have struggled with drug or alcohol addiction. There are schools that specialize in kids who have disabilities, right? There are schools that specialize in a particular style of education, like the classical model, which I am such a fan of what they do at the Academy of Classical Christian Studies in the Oklahoma City metro area, and of other schools on that model. I think it is brilliant, right? And for somebody on the sidelines to turn to these schools and say, you're bigoted if you have a particular mission, if you meet the needs of a particular group of students, right? Nobody is ever forced to go to a private school or a private tutor or any private program, right? To say that, well, people shouldn't be allowed to make these choices, or the public we should reject. And, we shouldn't send the fire department to these schools because they don't operate the way public schools do, is so small-minded, not to say bigoted. It's just sad to see it out there in the press, but that's what we get. I've got to leave it there here on the Trent England Show, our video edition. Of course, this will just become the regular Trent England Show next Monday. We have one more day of radio tomorrow morning. I hope if you're in our listening area, you will be tuned in to AM 1640 The Eagle, 7 to 9 a.m. tomorrow, one last time, and then the video program. And starting next Monday, this will be the Trent England Show. I'm Trent England. Thanks for watching.